I am curious though, because, and I think I know the answer, but the fact that the podcast is titled the Ex-Wife Podcast, I think when I first started listening to it, I was dreaming up like different scenarios of why it was called that. Eventually, I'm pretty sure I figured it out, but I will just go right to the source and ask, what's the meaning behind the name?
So many people have assumed that it's a guy complaining about his ex-wife, or a guy who lost his comics in a divorce, or some combination of sad story. It is a play on the X-Men name, so X hyphen wife, and kind of tying to the core concept of bringing Alicia into the X-Men universe.
Because you didn't have a background in X-Men.
No, I mean, the only thing that I had connected to the X-Men before we started the podcast was seeing the Fox films. I didn't even really watch the show growing up as a kid. Like, I'm sure I saw an episode here or there, but I didn't really have too much of a nerdy connection to anything as a child. The closest I got was like Harry Potter was my awakening, I think. But before that, it was like my dad and I used to watch musicals a lot. So like Grease was like a huge one. I was like oddly super obsessed with Grease. And then I would like find other things to be obsessed with, like Pearl Harbor. Like I used to, the movie, I had like the poster in my room and I listened to the soundtrack to go to sleep at night. But like nobody really in my family was into superheroes or comics or anything like that. So I just didn't have that connection. And then I watched some of the movies with my dad because he loved action films. So he was into like superhero movies. And it wasn't until we started the podcast at all that I'd never even read a comic before. And my first comic was actually a Captain America comic. And Justin was like, don't read that comic. And I was like, but it's Captain America. I like Captain America. And he was like, don't do
So,
it.
so my parents had moved and they told me we're not moving your comic collection. If you want it, you come and get it, or we're getting rid of it. And I come from a lineage of nerds who have had their comics thrown away by their parents and their parents' parents, and I was not about to let that happen. So I took it and I inventoried and I bagged and boarded, and I was stacking different runs. And the comic in question is Rob Liefeld's, I think it's like the Avengers or Captain America Heroes Reborn. And it's the, you see the classic image where Captain America's pectoral is 4 times the size of his head and just on the side because it makes no sense physically, geographically, geometrically, and I just
Anatomically.
yeah, yeah. That's gonna ruin your experience. Please put that down. Let me grab a spray bottle and just
Don't read
get
that.
that out of here.
Yeah. So that was the first comic I read. And then even when the podcast started, I didn't actually read the comics. It was about Justin explaining the comics to me. So we went through House of X and Powers of 10, and like, he would pull things up on a screen, or I would sort of like flip through the pages, but it was like, this is what's happening in this comic. And since I had no frame of reference, I just reacted in the moment. And then once we finished going through those 12 issues, I was like, all right, I'm going to read them. And then the rest is, I mean, this is all my stuff in this room. Like he has a whole separate nerd room. This is just what has happened to me in the last 3.5 years.
So success. Success.
Yes. Hats off to you, sir. Hats off.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, especially if you're in a position where X-Men wise, if all you've seen is the movies, you walk into the comics with, I think, a very different view of what the X-Men are and who these people are. Like you just assume Cyclops is a douchebag.
Yeah.
And sometimes
I
even if you watch the 92 animated series, you kind of assume that too.
Yeah.
But that's so then on the flip side of it, sir, where did your comic background began as a youngster?
It did, yeah. So it was a combination of cards, comics, action figures, TV shows, whatever I could get my hands on. My godfather, my uncle, he is one of that lineage of nerds that he collected, still has long boxes of comics. Every time that I would go over their house for holidays, they'd do the whole family thing over here, and we would sneak off, and he'd pull out some comic boxes, and we'd just go through single issues. And I was probably like 5 or 6 years old. I remember specifically the first X-Men comic that I read being the one where Wolverine has the adamantium ripped from his body by Magneto. In what is that?
X-Men number 25.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Fatal Attractions, right? Yeah.
Fatal
That's so
Attractions.
cool that that's also X-Men number 25.
Oh, because of the connection to Kate. Yeah.
That's my favorite one.
Yeah, I got Fabian Nicieza to sign it when we were at New York Comic Con a year or so ago, which was kind of like a full circle. Like this was what started it, and now here we are as an adult getting to do all this nerd stuff. And I continued wherever I could, kind of spinner racks at different stores, and then a big shift was I started to collect the black and white trades, the Essential X-Men books, which was my way into the Claremont run. And at that age and at that time, there was no other, like I wasn't going to collect those single issues. I was a child. I had no money. Any other money that I had was going directly into new comics. So this stack of black and white books, I read them cover to cover tons of times. So I've read those issues backwards and forwards since I was a kid. And then now being able to, like, I've upgraded to the omnibus collection. I have like the new big oversized hardcovers with all the color pages. And it's just like, it feels like I've reached my nerd dreams and goals. And, I dropped off for a while when I went to college, but then tried to come back into it around X-Men Blue, X-Men Gold. It didn't stick. And then when House of X and Powers of 10 was announced and they were doing all the promotion for that, I needed to get into it just because of all the talk about it. And I told myself I would go, once a week. I would go in the first week or two to get the issue ones, and then I'd wait for a little while. And I was there every single week needing to get that next story. And I've been every single Wednesday since getting my comics.
And I'll tell you what, Marvel and I think probably all the comic book companies, they're really good at basically getting you addicted to crack, in the sense that they'll have the main issues and you're like, the amount of times I went through this, like I'm just sticking to the main issues. And then they have spin-offs and miniseries and you're like, well, I got to grab those because I got to find out what's going on. And that's like literally where I was. I got to the point where it was shortly like we went through, oh my God, how many years ago? We went through Messiah Complex and then Avengers versus X-Men. And after that, I got to the point where I realized I was like literally spending like over $125 a week on comic books just because I had so many series that I had gotten wrapped into. And it was like I was in college and I'm like, this is idiotic. Like I can barely put gas in my car to get to class, but I'm going to go walk in here and just plop my card down like it's nothing. So I got out of it for a while, and it was only like the last year that I started getting back into it. So I feel you on that. So you always debate like how far to go back and get caught up. But yeah, I think I was right there with you. House of X and Powers of X or 10, whichever you want to call it, was my jump off point to get back in. I went and bought the huge graphic novel of that, and that was just like a mind screw in and of itself. From what I'm like, wait, what is going on? Like last I read, there was the Mansion still and Sentinels, and wow.
Yeah. They changed all sorts of games and prizes and details. We're all on the same side. Everybody's friends. And yeah, it's interesting what you're talking about of comics has that creep ability where you don't realize how many titles you're adding. I recently got a friend back into comics, and both myself and the shop owner that we both now go to were like, hey, just like, we'll be here. Don't overdo it. You're going to burn yourself out. You're going to have a stack you've not read for months, weeks, and trying to catch yourself back up. And, the stories will be there. They might even get collected in trades, and then you'll find them much more easily.
Yeah, and it's rough. I had the comic book store I was going to. I had I had a subscription list, a poll list, where every week he was, pulling the stuff, and it was this. To put it bluntly, it was a crap hole little store. The guy who worked there had to be in his 70s. He had been there since I think he was, I don't know, but and I went there every single week. And not only would I go in there and just, you wouldn't just go in and be like, hey, can I have my comics? Here's my card, and walk out. Like I'd end up in there for an hour talking to the guy. And man, I'm telling you, when I got to the point where I had to stop, that was one of the most painful conversations I'd ever had in my life. And I'm divorced once before. And that that conversation was like, it was like breaking up with your old grandpa. Like you had to be like, dude, I can't do this anymore. I can't. I know it's probably buying your whiskey, but I just can't do it.
That's so sad.
Oh man.
That's interesting. As far as Alicia, have you gone back now that you've like gotten into this? Have you had like a lot of exposure, like getting back into previous runs and eras and hitting the omnibuses and those things?
So I haven't, where somewhere around here is Inferno. I'm halfway through that trade. But I haven't done a lot of like reading of the omnibuses. I would say there's two things that have gotten me to read older issues. One is less read, but more know about. Justin would do these like my ex ed moments on the podcast. So we'd go back and he'd like go through a certain arc. We talked about seminal moments. We'd talk about like really big moments in X history, kind of like reviewing those stories to get a little bit of that here and there. And then we've done a handful of things with Chad on Grey Malkin Lane. We do like the trials with them pretty regularly, or now we're doing script readings, or we'll do like a Patreon episode where we have to like learn a bunch about a character. So Chad will give you like a reading list, and it'll span from anywhere from like 8 to 20 comics that you have to read to like cover your section of a trial. So there are chunks of the past that I have read thanks to Chad, honestly, because he'll be like, okay, to prep for this, like you need to read this whole era. And the other day I was actually looking at something and I said to Justin, I was like, oh, that's Jean, but that's time displaced Jean. And I was like, look at me. I know that that's time displaced Jean. I can call them the time displaced X-Men because I've read a bunch of that now. So yeah, there's little bits here and there. And I like to read the older stuff, but like I've probably been trying to fight through reading Inferno since the beginning of the year. And I just like read an issue and then I'm like, well, I need 2 weeks off from that. And then I'll come back to you, Claremont.
Yeah. Yeah, and not even just Chad and Grey Malkin, but any other show that we guest on. We do a lot of guesting and hanging out, talking with people about comics, and sometimes we'll talk about a specific issue. There was some opportunity where it was open-ended, so I was able to kind of cherry pick some stories that gave context to some of the issues that we're reading currently. So they do some of those kind of legacy throwback stories. And there was the recent one, Storm by Ann Nesenti, that really gets into the drama between Kitty and Storm after Storm's gone Mohawk. And so framing that story with a couple of guest appearances, but with some very specific choice issues, both, I think, life, death, and then the aftermath, and when it first happens, when she loses her powers, or when actually like when Wolverine was supposed to get married. And
we also had like a plan to talk about Kitty Pryde and Wolverine, like the mini series, and I read the whole thing and we've never done anything with it, but it doesn't matter because I read it and now that's like an important part of Kitty's history that I actually know. So I enjoy reading, older stuff and digging into that, but I tend to find myself like overwhelmed with projects. And then I'm like, I have to read the new issues that came out this week so we can record the podcast and talk about them. And I don't have as much free time to read it as I would like to. If I could just spend all day, every day reading novels and comics and making costumes, like I'd love to do that.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that way too. I keep like wanting to know like when it is that I can just win the lottery and I can just read comics and work on cosplay all day, because I'm on vacation specifically this week because it's leading up to WonderCon. And I knew months ago, even though I swore I wouldn't be con crunching, that I would end up con crunching. So I took this week off and I'm glad I did, as I've got like paint and filler between my nail beds here. But
honestly, are you even a cosplayer if you're not con crunching? Like I just feel like who's really finished with everything?
You're right.
Nobody. And if you are, you go, well, I have a few days. Let me just make some tweaks or like make a whole new accessory or a whole new prop for this costume.
Yeah, and I was like, I think 3 months ago, I was looking at what cosplays I was taking to WonderCon, and I was excited because I'm like, based upon my thinking right now and looking at everything, I should be done with everything a month before WonderCon. So this is going to be smooth sailing. And now I've already like got it in my head. Okay, that's got to drive for 12 hours, which means then I could do this. So I'm like, I'm leaving first thing Friday morning, and I think Thursday night is when I will finally be able to put the final like coat on stuff. And yeah, you're absolutely right. You're not a cosplayer if you're not con crunching.
When we went to San Diego Comic-Con last year, I was like, I'm not gonna bring magic. I'm not gonna bring my soul sword because the first soul sword I made was like humongous, so big. And I was like, I can't bring that, whatever. And it's broken and I need to fix it, blah, blah, blah. And then I got word that there was going to be like a magic users photo group. And I was like, oh, I got to. So, like, literally up until I think 2 in the morning before we left, I was finishing a sword. And we like had to get up at like 4 a.m. or something to go to the airport. So I basically just took a little snooze because I needed to fix it because I had made the sword, but then I bought like a snowboard carrying case to put it in for the airplane.
Oh.
And it was too wide. So I had to like remove one of the side pieces and make that like detachable so that I could put it in the snowboard case and then have it fly to San Diego and then be able to reattach that piece. So now I have two soul swords.
New technology
And new
to travel.
technology, yeah.
That's yeah, I feel that pain because it only occurred to me like a couple weeks ago that I was flying to California for WonderCon, and I'm like, oh my God, how am I gonna have a suitcase that a lightsaber will fit in?
Right.
Like, how is it? Oh shit.
Yeah.
So I had to do a ton of scouring online. Eventually found one where I could get this like 56-inch long hard case suitcase and had to
Yeah.
special order it and get it in just in time because otherwise I'm like, otherwise because I'm doing Balin's Skull, if you're familiar with Star Wars, the Ahsoka series at all. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I can walk around with the hilt, but if anybody, just on my belt, but if somebody wants to take a picture, you kind of look like a bit of a dweeb, like you didn't even bring the blade along with. Come on.
That's exactly how I felt because I was like, I can't bring magic without her sword. Like, what do you mean? That's not an option.
Not complete.
Not an option. That's like going somewhere as Kitty without Lockheed. You just don't do it.
Right. Yeah. The as I sort of like switch gears here, this is interesting because I've kind of gotten the vibe that like through Instagram and everything you've said that Kitty Pryde is your favorite.
It's a difficult decision.
Hmm?
I feel like Kitty is I'm very connected to her because her and Emma were sort of them and Marauders were my like gateway. They were the thing that hooked me. Like once we really started going through Marauders, I was like, I'm gonna read comics. And I also have gotten a lot of feedback since I started cosplaying Kitty that people are like, you are Kitty, you are Kitty, you look like Kitty, you're Kitty. And I'm like, okay, great. I love it. Let me make every single one of her looks. I want to be her. So I feel very connected to Kitty, but as far as like my favorite goes, there's a rotation that involves like Kitty, Emma, Magic, Maddie, Laura.
Which I don't know that you realize this, but that is like the most X-Men fan answer. Like when someone asks you who your favorite X-Men is and you give them a list of 5 to 7, like you're an X-Men fan then.
Yes.
Like, anyone that just says one guy, get out of here. You only saw the TV show. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
There can never be just one. But I would say Kitty is someone that I feel like I get her on a very personal level. We have like other connections, we have like dance connections, we have personality connections. Yeah, I feel like I get her.
And
she gets me.
To kind of build off that, recognizing the connection to Kitty and to Emma and to Marauders, that was all like part of the elaborate scheme. Our initial tagline was one man's elaborate scheme to get his wife into X-Men comics, ... That's working, as it was eventually updated to. And I think I updated it to that worked.
That worked, yeah.
Where I saw interest, I doubled down, right? Like, okay, oh, you like Kitty and Emma. Well, we should read their first issue is actually the same issue. So let's go and check out that story. Oh, you actually really like Marauders. Let's interview the artist from Marauders. That's a surprise to you as like we're gearing up for the Hellfire Gala. It's just like key elements of the journey that were informed by her responses to what she was enjoying or not. Like I don't bring. I had a goal initially
I was
was
wondering what this is gonna be.
to ruin Charles
Oh.
Xavier in her mind because of how the animated series and even the movies portray him versus, like the real guy
Who
that we
he
all
really
know.
is.
Right. And to build up a little more of who Cyclops is. And I succeeded entirely too well on the first one, and I feel like I'm floundering on the second one. But X-Men 97 is doing some work for me, so that helps.
We'll
Yes.
see. But I hate Charles Xavier. It was like we went through, was it Deadly Genesis was the
Yes.
one? Yeah, we went through that.
That was why we went through it.
And I was like, honestly, what is your what are your parameters on saying choice vocabulary on this show?
Knock yourself out.
Okay, I honestly, fuck you, Charles. Like
You're a jerk.
everything, literally, exactly. See, I am Kitty. I just like, I just despise him. I feel like it's so interesting to think about the films because I feel like Charles was given a complete 180 and like he's so kind and caring. And I'm like, no, you're manipulative and you do what you want to do and you act like you don't break the rules, but you break the rules all the time. At least Emma breaks the rules and she owns up to it. But then Storm, when I read the comics, I was like, how dare they do her such a disservice in those films? Like, how rude. Period. But the animated series.
Well, and I felt the exact same way with Cyclops in those movies. Like Cyclops existed purely to be a baseline, like the most generic NPC cardboard cutout for all the other characters to bounce off without any depth. And I remember having like friends who like watched X-Men the animated series and saw the movies. And I remember one of them when I handed him Avengers versus X-Men for the first time, and he got halfway through it and he was like, dude, Cyclops is kind of a badass. And I'm like, yeah. Like he's just, unfortunately, a lot of times he's portrayed as not an interesting character.
I think there's two things about Cyclops. One, I will say that in his killing Charles Xavier era, I think that's great for him. I love that. I love that era. And I like Scott in those comics. But if I'm being completely honest, probably one of the number one reasons why I don't like Scott Summers is his qualities that annoy me the most are the qualities about myself that I don't like. Like when I was in college, my friends used to call me the general because I would be like, what are we doing? What is the plan? Or like we're playing a board game and I'd be like, whose freaking turn is it right now?
All right, people, let's move.
Yeah,
like, get in there, Wolverine.
That
you come to fight, or is it your day off? Like, Jesus.
Like that part of myself, I'm like cringe about. So I'm like, oh God, Cyclops, you're so annoying. You're so demanding.
I think that's the first time you verbalized that in my presence, and it's just
that's something I've not admitted before. So you get the exclusive on that.
Owning up to it, I like it. Fantastic. That's
it's just like it's that, and then like Justin refers to them as little brother games. Like I picture Cyclops in my mind. Most of what he does is when someone's going like, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. Like, that's what my internal reaction is.
But he's not. He is like the oldest brother. He's trying to be dad. Like he's not the guy that's gonna annoy you in that way. He's the guy that's the rules and you're upset about
it. Exactly. And I often am the rules and I don't like it.
Well, there was, it made me laugh because like a couple months ago I was rewatching all of X-Men the animated series, getting ready for X-Men 97, and there was a scene in particular I remember that exemplified everything what we're talking about, where it's like the middle of the night and Xavier gets, attacked telepathically. And this alarm goes off and all the X-Men come stumbling out of their rooms in their pajamas. Wolverine is just in his boxers. Cyclops comes running around the corner in full uni. And I'm like, that dude's sleeping in that thing. Yes. Just in case he's needed. Like I can see him laying. Yeah, he's in his uniform, laying on top of his blankets, just like muttering as he's dozing off. Xavier might need me. Xavier might need me. Alarm! And that just like I felt like summed up like the casual fan view of Scott Summers, which is unfortunate because in the books, I really think he is a badass.
He's great. Master tactician, field leader, strategist, cool power.
We'll see.
How
My,
many hot chicks is he pulling? Like, come on.
I know.
Yeah,
Well,
he banged Jean and Emma. Two
really?
Jeans, really. Well,
Sure,
how many times she's died? Like,
right?
Oh
do
gosh.
those
Those
count as new ones,
count,
or is it just
right?
like,
And then the whole weird thing with Betsy and Psylocke, right?
yeah, yeah, the guy's got game. I don't care what people say. Like, he's the guy you bring home to meet mom.
Hey,
That was always the dynamic, and I'm glad we're like even in X-Men 97, like moving past the
Mhm.
Scott, Jean, Logan love triangle. Well, as much as I loved it as a kid, let's face it,
right.
that record's played so many times. But yeah, that's what it was. Is Gene liked Scott because he was the guy you brought home to meet mom, but Logan was the guy in the leather jacket with the motorcycle parked outside smoking a cigarette.
Yeah.
That was the whole dynamic. Well, we did all that, but Justin, that means I have to ask you like I would say what your favorite character is, but I know we're gonna get a list, so that's okay.
It's a list and it's a fluctuating list, so I think that that is important to keep in
Mhm.
mind. But the top three almost always remain the same, so I'll go with those. And that is Nightcrawler, Magneto, and Storm.
Yeah.
Generally in that order. Nightcrawler is in the top spot, but Storm and Magneto, they're just, the best. And I couldn't say no. Uh, if I kept on going down the list, I'd probably have Magic on there. I really, influenced by the comics lately, I've really been enjoying Sync and what
Mhm.
he's been having in his story for the last few years. And, Forge is high up on my list just because of his power and his ability and his like the way he looks at engineers when they try to understand what he's done and he has no idea because he just makes stuff. He doesn't know
Like,
how. Like I'm Forge. What do you mean? I made the thing, you wanted the thing. That's it.
it's
hmm
here.
Yeah, that's like asking Storm exactly how she summons the wind. Like I
Right.
just
Right.
do it. Yeah.
Feel it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just a part of me.
Yeah.
hmm
I
That
mean, I know Wolverine is in my top 10
Mhm.
probably. Alicia, I don't want to say makes fun of me, but is very aware of my wall of Wolverines, which is just a shelf of every kind of Wolverine action figure they've ever made because I need them all.
hmm
Them all.
I
I
need them
mean,
all.
I do poke fun, but like I also have a wall of hats and a wall of bags and a wall of baddies over there. And like,
Look at
so
this one. Look at that one. Yeah.
look at this one. Look at this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that.
Well, I have kind of my wall of Wolverine behind me. I
I
mean,
love it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
that's
amazing.
the frustrating thing about it, and that will like for me always be like the one. I remember I was 19 years old. 9 years old. The year was 1989. Neighbor kid handed me a comic, Uncanny X-Men number 216. I'd never even heard of the X-Men. He's
Mm.
like, "Hey, read this." And in this, there's this character with this crazy cowl and these claws, and in this issue, he's like gone like borderline animalistic, like he's having one of his Claremont freakouts.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I was like locked on. I mean, my youngest son is named Logan, so I mean, like if
Sure.
I'm giving away my fan, the only problem with it is it got to this point where through the 2000s, it like got to be cliche to be a Wolverine fan
Yeah.
because it was a popular entity. They were just saturating the market. He was on every team Marvel had. I mean, I still think as much as I'm a Wolverine fan, I do feel like it's a little bit blasphemous that the different animated series went from X-Men the animated series to Wolverine and the X-Men, which I
Yeah.
felt like that's like renaming it like Paul McCartney and the Beatles. Like that's a
Yeah.
little bit like that's probably not cool. I even felt that way, but yeah, so I feel you on the wall of Wolverines there.
But also great show. The
Yeah.
name
Yeah,
aside, that was a
yeah.
great show. I enjoyed the first season, but yeah, he's just so cool, mysterious, and so many interesting powers, and
He is cool.
and
He's great. We love the bubs, but like
but
he's in
oversaturation,
everything.
yeah, everywhere. It's like to say you're a Wolverine fan is to say you're a Spider-Man fan. Like we all like Wolverine, unless you
Right,
don't,
yeah.
and you're on the complete opposite side. Nobody feels indifferent about him.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, no shade to anyone, including you, who he is your favorite character. I do harp on it sometimes on the podcast though, because everything is Wolverine all the
hmm
time.
Yeah.
Like some of those, Justin was just opening the new Marvel Legends that he got the other day, and like some of those characters, I'm like, we were talking about like Lilandra, like who else would be in a box set with Lilandra outside of Wolverine? Like, what about Deathbird? What about Xandra? What about like tons of other characters? Like, why do we have to have him with Wolverine?
Because he sells units.
I know,
Yeah.
and it's
He
his
moves
50th
boxes.
anniversary,
It's
and
his
now
50th birthday.
all the
Mhm.
things.
Well, it does. It ends up a bit of that thing where obviously you guys know, but the reason why that happens is, like you said, because Wolverine's marketable. Like
Right.
he's reached that point of like national notoriety where everybody knows who Wolverine is. So if you want to sell a character that's lesser known, oh, I know, put him in a box with a character will sell. Like you're
Right.
not going to put Thunderbird in there. Like it'll be in the discount rack by Black Friday. Like we all know that, right? But even though us hardcore X-Men fans will be like, no way, they made a Thunderbird. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
I
yeah, and
have
it was
that.
There's not enough of us.
yeah. And it did get I admit it because it got a little bit on the gatekeeping side because I remember like 2010s and 2015s through there going to cons and when you'd tell other X-Men fans, oh, my favorite character is Wolverine, they
Yeah, right.
like yeah, because it was just everywhere, especially because Hugh Jackman was just out there cranking those movies out, and yeah, it was just he was on the Avengers and he was on the Fantastic Four for a while, and every X-Men book, and then he'd always have like his own series and then like mini series coming out, and it was just like and they even made a joke about that. I think when they were, is it officially called the Utopia era? If you
Yeah.
were into that, where Cyclops was breaking down like who all the new teams were, the X-Men, and Wolverine's at his desk like, psych, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I can't be on every team. Like,
Yeah.
they even made a joke out of it too.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. It's
But
good when they have that self-reflective moment, They're like, we know what we're doing. You know what we're doing.
but at the
Mhm.
same time, like I was never mad about all that. Like I loved New Avengers. I thought that was great. You're gonna put Wolverine and Spider-Man with Captain America and Iron Man and Luke Cage and
Ooh, Luke
but
Cage.
it
Nice.
was a great lineup with Spider-Woman and sometimes Jessica Jones, I think.
I'll take it.
Great lineup. And
Mhm.
Wolverine just added so much. I think honestly the only time that I feel like is this year where we have our maybe sixth or seventh upcoming Wolverine title, recently announced. I'm like, okay, I get it's your birthday, but
Mm.
Pump the
pump the
brakes.
brakes.
Well, and I do feel like a lot of writers were really good. I always enjoyed in the comics anytime they teamed up Wolverine and Spider-Man
Yeah.
because you had two characters who had a ton of respect for each other, but could not be polar opposites, but could still like mesh well together. And I feel like for a long time, that's why they did that with Kitty Pryde and then also did that with Jubilee because it created that great dynamic between the two opposing views, but they were never going to get into an out and out screaming match over stuff,
Right.
yeah, so here's the interesting question as we talk about comics. We have the Krakoa era coming to an end. What are the thoughts on the Krakoa era? Are we sad? Are we happy? Did we enjoy the ride?
So
Yeah,
this was her
you
first.
go first because I have a
Oh,
lot to say.
I mean, are we sad? Yes. Primarily because it feels like, we worked to build a lot of this new world and now we're taking maybe like 5 or 6 steps back to put things in a more base and wide audience friendly bucket
Mhm.
that is familiar and potentially regressive. And I'm trying to keep as optimistic as possible about the new line because I am interested in the creators. I do
Mhm.
have some interest in some of the teams and some of the other books. It's just I was loving this as a renaissance of what a line of comics could be. That you have the writers all in communication with each other. You have intentional builds towards a crossover event versus just, hey, everybody get in here. We're doing a crossover. Like there was so much they put them literally and physically on an island unto themselves to just what could the X-Men be if we were just on our own and
Yeah.
built our own culture and our own society. And I feel like there was a lot of meat on that bone that we didn't get to. And I understand why. I get it. I get why from a synergy perspective, but I also get why from a new reader's perspective. Like talking to people at the comic shop, they don't know like what era are we in, what
Yeah.
subgroup are we in, how many miniseries do I need to buy if I'm trying to keep up with this, and they
Hard
keep
to
on
follow.
closing them and opening new ones and changing it, like even trying to navigate a reading order of the Krakoan era is a nightmare.
Mhm.
Like Marvel Unlimited doesn't even try to do it. They're just
Yeah.
like, yeah, there's pages at the end of the issue. Just follow that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, Krakoa is how I entered the X-Men. Krakoa is what drew me in. Krakoa gave me the character developments and the relationships of the characters that I was the most drawn to, and then kind of set me on my X-Men journey. So I definitely have a lot of, I'm gonna start crying. Oh my God. Okay. I have a lot of feelings about Krakoa ending. I understand it. I know why it's happening. I never ever wanted it to end. And I'm very much, getting from lots of people from different perspectives, like, welcome to the X-Men. This is what happens. Like, you get attached, you come in an era, and then that era is wiped away and we go to something else. And I understand the progression of it, but there's just a lot of diversity, a lot of interesting stories, a lot of cool like character development and personal relationships that I've grown really attached to. And it's difficult to kind of see because, like months ago, Justin and I would talk about, and I was kept bringing up, like, why is Wolverine suddenly in his like cartoon 90s costume in all of these books? Like, and then we noticed it with Cyclops and, had the conversation, and it was like, oh, that's just how Josh wanted to draw him. And like, I get really I get really angry when I think about the way that it is being like pigeonholed to make it feel like everything is the same. Like, as fans of a universe, we can appreciate the animated series and where the characters are in that point in time and have them be in a completely different place in comics. And so it's like a conflicting thing in my head because I completely understand it from the marketing perspective, from the like, well, if we get fans of the series, then we want fans of them to become fans of the comics. But as a fan who, feels so passionately about the characters right now, it's hard for me to see them being like shoved in another direction. What are you laughing at?
Ryan Stegman's use of the word passionate.
Yeah, that's why I said
and it's just, when they announced all the initial lineups and arts and just feeling the onslaught, intentional word choice, onslaught of X-Men fans picking apart every little choice. And why is Cyclops looking like a teenager? Like, what is this uniform? What is it? All these different questions. And like he tweeted, X-Men fans are really passionate. Like,
Yeah.
that is the most diplomatic way of categorizing it, because yes, that you could call it that.
But like I love Krakoa and it'll always hold a special place in my heart. But I am excited to go on a new adventure with these characters, to see what happens, to figure out how their stories unfold. My hope is that we're not going to take the vastness of Krakoa and whittle it down to just a few of like these core characters that are always used, like when the original five, what was the name of that title?
The
original X-Men, yeah, came out recently. I was like, why do we need another story with just these five X-Men in it? Like there are so many other characters, and not even to say, because I should shut up because like my two girls, like
well served,
Emma and Kate on a team together. Magic, she's there. You know what I mean? Like my characters are not disappearing, but I feel for the people whose characters are disappearing and like the types of stories that were told in Krakoa. So that's a long-winded way to say I'm fine, but I also will probably cry a bunch.
Yeah, I thought I agree with you definitely in the sense that it felt like they spent a lot of time setting up Krakoa and exactly what it was and how everything was working and the council and the regeneration. I still want to know how Wolverine regenerates with his adamantium, but I'll move along. He doesn't.
Forge has a punch bowl full of hot adamantium and he puts Humpty Dumpty back together again.
That crazy motherfucker.
Yeah.
He's like, that's the great thing about having a guy like that on your team. You'd be like, he thinks of something. Yeah, I missed that one. That I had wondered that because I'd even asked Michelle Waffle Otero that. She's like, I honestly have no idea.
It's I think it's maybe like X-Force number 4 or 5, and it's 2 panels, and it's very quick. And then other times in the era, Proteus is shown adding in adamantium with his reality warping abilities in some places that he is not supposed to. Like Laura, who only previously had adamantium claws, now has a full adamantium
Full
skeleton.
skeleton.
Good for her. She deserved it. She graduated. That's
That's
awesome.
right.
But
Right.
yeah, they spent so long setting up Krakoa that when I heard it was coming to an end, I was kind of like, already? Like it felt like they were setting this thing up for like a 10-year run of like this
Mhm.
being, their base. And, I think I definitely think you're right. Like where you come into comics is like that becomes your home. Like that becomes your expectations. And I sort of came in end of Claremont run, beginning of Jim Lee run, where it was very much the school and it was a blue team and it was gold team and, had that classic look. But, even then over the years, like through the eras, like through the, Utopia era and all these things, it was always fun to see it change. The difference is I know eventually they're going to come back to the school, whether
Right.
it's in 2 years, whether it's in 10 years, eventually some era will bring them back to that. So in the meantime, I'm just okay for going for the ride. Like
Yeah.
I'm a lot more interested in what they do with the stories and the characters and that sort of thing. And having Gail Simone taking over Uncanny X-Men has me super
Right.
excited.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I think that the biggest fear I have, which it seems to be dissipating, is the proposal of the idea that we would erase Krakoa in the timeline, and like, oh, we're gonna go back to this time point and make it so Krakoa never happened. So like that was my biggest fear. And how are they going to, they have this dominion that they're fighting. How do they get out of this without us losing everything? So I understand that, when an era shifts, we're shifting, but I am hoping that the character development for some of these characters doesn't disappear just because they're on a new adventure, like I think like Kate, Kitty being called Kate, like she made a decision to mature in that way. And like Iceman, like trying to figure out his Omega level status. And like, we obviously have no idea even where he is at this moment, but like, he went through a lot to get where he is now. And I don't want him to be reverted back to what feels like classic Iceman and him lose that journey that he's gone on,
Storm.
Storm. Hello, Storm. Even we were talking about the other day, like Blob. Like
Sure.
he went through a transformation,
He's already gone back kind of with
Yeah,
Uncanny Avengers.
but he thought he was fighting with Cyclops.
Yeah,
He thought,
but they primed it.
but like that, like if he just goes back to being a villain, I'm like, but he was a friendly neighborhood bartender and he had life changes and like
And a mustache.
and a mustache. Like,
A
yeah.
mustache,
And Storm. Like,
yeah.
Storm.
Yeah,
So
it's
we'll see.
I know what you mean.
Optimistic.
Yeah, they did that many years ago with Spider-Man. I think it was like post Civil War, where of course, granted, Spider-Man, the problem that they had is that writing wise, he had kind of gotten like slightly darker and darker and darker and darker, and there was sort of this decision like we need him to get him back to like happy-go-lucky, down on his luck Peter Parker, and they just did like a Mephisto thing and snap of the fingers, and you're like, we just lost like 10 years of character development. Like watching him go through like Aunt May die and everything that happened between him and Stark and all these things, and it was just poof, gone up in smoke like it never happened.
And then to see just the joy and response to Ultimate Spider-Man and what they're doing, having him be this older guy with kids trying to make it all work. I think issue 1 is going into his 5th printing next month because of how much. I mean, you also have Hickman and Chichetto, but aside, still the core of the character was allowed to evolve in a way that was interesting and resonant with fans that had been along for the whole ride.
It's interesting, like thing to look at objectively, in that you have characters that are, what are you laughing at? Objectively. Yeah. So you have characters that, like if you think about the animated series, right? We're re-diving into something that happened 30 years ago, and we're telling these stories of these characters that we as comic fans know have progressed over 30 years, but there's like that origin story version of them that is the thing that brings people in. Or it reminds me of Into the Spider-Verse, or is it like once it gets into Across the Spider-Verse, where they're like, okay, like let's do this again, but one more time, and like really briefly this time, of like, here's my origin story. you understand the perspective of needing to go back to that as a way to like generationally get new readers in, but then you also think about why does it always have to be those characters? Why can't every generation have a new character that goes in, or a new version of Spider-Man, or a new version of Wolverine, or whatever the case may be? So it's like a difficult balance when you're looking at it from both sides of like, I understand why you're doing it, but then it's, I don't know. I get really, I have a lot of feelings about it because I'm like, okay, I know you have to make money, but the people who are currently giving you money, you're slapping them in the face to get money from other people. You're being like,
Maybe.
you'll stick around. We know you're not going to go anywhere, so we're just going to blow up your life and start from scratch.
They're right, though.
I know
Yeah.
they're right, but like, stop doing that to us, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. So
Grumbling,
it's very conflicting.
grumbling and angry tweets do not hurt their sales. They can
Yeah,
care
Right.
less.
no,
Right.
they're still going to do it.
They're
Still
like,
talking stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
You're still buying the books.
we pissed off 75% of the fan base and sales went up 15%.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll take that trade, you know.
Well.
It's interesting the time that we're at now.
Mm.
And I was thinking about it the other day. So when Claremont was kind of pushed out of the book unceremoniously, what were the narratives that he was building, right? He wanted Magneto to be in Charles Xavier's role, taking over the school. He was planning to kill off Charles Xavier in a handful more issues. I think issue 300 was going to be that plan. And they didn't want to do that. They wanted to revert him back to basics. All the characters go back to basics. Now, 30 years later, we're at this point where we have not the same show, but a very similar show embracing the ideology that was rejected in the 90s. Magneto, now in this power position, trying to reconcile how his dream and Charles' dream work together. And you have the metaphor of that being Krakoa also being rejected. So the hope is that 30 years from now, or maybe shorter with time dilation and expanse of IP and properties, we'll get a Krakoan animated series and it'll be amazing.
That'd be so dope.
Yeah, I gotta admit that I realize that it's a Hail Mary. But that's one thing that's got me really excited about X-Men 97 is it is so good. And, you know, they're already talking in a third season now that if this thing continues to be hit and we get into like season 4, 5, 6, could we get a season of Krakoa? Two
Right.
seasons of Krakoa?
Right.
The seasons might last longer than it did in the comics. We'll see.
Whatever. If I can have it back in any form, I will gladly take it.
Yeah.
But like that's the idea of seeing the characters in these like other situations and seeing them develop, like that's what we love about them, right? So that's why I'm trying to keep a positive outlook on whatever is going to happen. Is like it's going to be a new journey for the characters that we love. Like they can't continue on in the same storyline forever, but they can continue on in different ways. So how do we just be as open-minded as we can about that? But of course, like if something happens to a character that you love, that you hate, like you're gonna have feelings about it, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, you know, it's all about, I think, how you approach it and what your expectations are. You know, we talked earlier about you know, the Fatal Attraction storyline and, you know, X-Men number 25 when Magneto removed his adamantium. And this was at a point where already for several years I had been the biggest Wolverine fan in the world. And the issue that followed that up was Wolverine number 75, where also Fatal, where they revealed that he had the bone claws, which was a major mind fuck at the time, right? Because we were still operating under the mindset that of he has no memory of anything prior to Weapon X, and even then, his memory of Weapon X is really shady. So the whole assumption was that his adamantium and the claws got put in at the same time, and I felt like not having his healing factor and now having bone claws and him leaving the X-Men, it was exciting. Because it's like, this is a whole area of unknown. Like, we have no idea. In the past, you're like, oh, somebody shows up in an issue and is mad at Wolverine, and you're like, okay, it'll be a good fight, but let's be honest here. Who's going to win? So, yeah, I think going into that, it's sort of like, okay, like I'm interested to see just where they go with it. And, you know, yeah, you can be critical of it because let's face it, sometimes writers get off on, and you're like, okay, back, you know, got off on the weeds a little bit there.
Yeah. And as long as they're, you know, I enjoy the writers that they've lined up for the three. Gail, I like Jed's work. I have read some stuff from Eve and really enjoy it. And I think that that's exciting and promising from a start, that these are not creators that would just play the same song again,
Right.
that they're going to take it in a new direction. They're going to add some new depth. It is starting from a somewhat familiar starting place. Everybody seems to be going home in a sense, and diverting around the world. But I'm into it. I just, I wanted more Krakoa.
Yeah.
Right.
The other thing I'll say is, we were talking a little bit about this last night because we were recording our episode and we were talking about X-Men Forever, and I had issues with that issue. And I realized after we recorded, like I said to Justin, I was like, I think the reason that I'm so angsty when it comes to certain things is that I know Krakoa's ending, and I want it to have an ending deserving of all of all the mutants who have built Krakoa deserve to be a part of the ending. And when we're pulling the ending to the fate of like one person or a small group of people, that makes me upset. And I didn't really realize that until like I had my feelings while we were recording. And then I sat at the kitchen table and ate food like angsty. And I was like, oh, I'm worried that they're not going to give it the ending that I feel like it rightfully deserves, like this should be a big effort by so many mutants because so many mutants built Krakoa. And that's what, we think about Magneto and him coming back. And when the title was announced, Resurrection of Magneto, like we were talking about how his death was so epic and so like impactful for him as a character and his storyline, that I was like, his resurrection needs to be something magnificent for a wonderfully like epic reason, and not just we need to bring Magneto back, because otherwise you're doing a disservice to the story of his death. And that's kind of how I feel about Krakoa. Like I have no idea what the ending is going to be, but when it was like, thrown out there, the idea of erasing Krakoa doesn't feel like an ending that does the era justice. And so that's, if the ending does it justice, then I'll be okay. Whatever happens.
Yeah, it's kind of like the the T.S. Eliot thing, like your world, you thought it'd end with a bang and instead it ends with a whimper. And it's sort of like that when it's that epic of an era, I feel like it needs to end with some like major event that has major revelations and major cliffhangers going forward, rather than because I think it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to end like for where they're setting it up. I feel like it's not going to, but it doesn't have to end happy for me. It just has to end epic.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and it has to affect like so many of them. So many of them need to be involved in my mind, and not just
Endgame.
some stupid telepath named Charles Xavier.
You need endgame energy.
Yeah, I need
Yes.
endgame energy.
You need the cap on the 10 years of storytelling and all the characters coming back for their shout out moments. And like, you want synergy. Look at the plan you already have.
Right. So I do have one last question here, which is a really broad question. This past September, you guys got to go to the Uncanny Experience. And this has become like my new thing. Like every episode, I'm going to ask people at the end who were at the Uncanny Experience what their experience was. I have a lot to say on it, but people have already heard me talk about it. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it.
It was magical. It's like a special bubble of existence that that first one I will cherish forever, but I'm so excited for so many more. I think, my experience was that I was cosplaying as Kitty. I was a cosplay guest, and the first day my job was to just sit at the top of the stairs and like welcome students to the school. And just the amount of love and energy, like fabulous energy, the support that people had for each other. Like there are so many moments from that experience that I will remember forever. Like, first of all, there is a young gentleman named Noah who we met and he like came up to me. I had so many experiences at that event of people being like, "Oh my God, you're Alicia from the Ex-Wife podcast." And I was like, "You know who I am?" I'm confused. And like he like wrote me a note and was like, "I'm so excited to meet you, Mrs. Wilder." And like I was just like, Noah, you're so precious because we're the same. Like, we got to like be in this place where we could all like hold each other safely. And that was really wonderful. And then I got to be on Homo Superior podcast, did their X Games panel, and I was one of the people on the panel, and they had this like moment of you have to flip this paper over and you have to get your blindfolded partner to guess the things that are on your thing. And one of them was like different crossovers or events. And half of them, like most of them, I had never read before. And I was really nervous because I was like, this is a room full of X-Men fans of all lengths of time, and many of them probably have so much more knowledge of the X-Men than I do. And I started using like other things to describe them that weren't related to the story, like for Extinction, I was like, everyone's dead, like, because I didn't know how else to describe it. And the response of like people getting excited when Michael, my partner, got it right, like
Yes.
even though I wasn't doing it in what would be considered like the X-Men answers, that just loving embrace from everybody all the time, and like just seeing how everybody got into it, and we all lived in the X Mansion for a weekend, and it was magical. It was really magical. You? How did it go for you, babe?
How do I follow that? I mean, especially with my limited ability to tap into my emotions. It was like adult summer camp. It was great.
Yeah.
Like, that was honestly the vibe that I got from it. It was a bunch of people that were there for the same thing and that all had a very similar, I don't want to say mindset, but like understanding of what it means to be an X-Men fan in this way. And it means to support each other, and it means to have each other's backs, and to know that like we're all a little weird and a little different. And that is what makes each of us unique. And so it was this place created by these folks to be a place where we could just gather and nerd out for an entire weekend.
Yes.
And to have after parties and to go to events and to meet people that I had only known online for years through the podcast and through guesting on people's show. Like we met Dylan, and well, we had already met Dylan, but like we met Regina for the first time. We met Chad for the first time. Like, and all of these people that we'd just been Zoom boxes before for so long, but and then to even like Jenna Lee and Adam, and like it was just I was not prepared, I think, for just how much fun it would be, and just how much of a community driven event that it was. And to be able to stand at the front of the class twice, and to like we taught two classes, or I taught two classes, we taught one together, and to spend a full hour talking about the Krakoan era in an engaged conversation, the whole room asking questions, bringing up things, and to only get halfway through our slides in the hour that we've been given, because the conversation was that rich and engaging, and like people had so many different perspectives and voices on it. Like that was beautiful.
There are not many places that I could go into a room full of people who are all eating food at tables together and be by myself and just very comfortably like sit down at a table and be like, "Hey y'all, what's up? Like, can I eat lunch with you?" And just instantly become connected to the people that you're sitting at a table with. Like that's a very special, very safe place that was created. And it's really a testament to the way that X-Men fans see themselves in the characters. And there was no question of acceptance of anyone in that space. Like no matter who you were or how you came into that space, you were accepted for who you are. And I think, when you go to a larger con, there are so many fandoms and so many things happening, but you don't always find your people, like there are so many varieties of nerds. And at the Uncanny Experience, like those are your people, and it from the moment you walk in to like the second you leave. You still feel like those people are your people. That's your family. You're creating bonds there that will last your whole life. So it's just it's so special. And I'm so glad that, you know, all the work that Dylan and Chandler and Chris and Regina, like that they put into it, that it's so well received because their whole hearts are in that event, and, you know, also probably bits of their soul and their blood. So to have it be something that is so loved by so many people is really special also, just on that front.
Yeah, it was amazing. I've been, you're absolutely right. I've been to cons, and you know, at cons you see like, you know, they might have like the Marvel meetup, you know, the Star Wars meetup. A lot of times you see cosplayers there that are cosplaying as characters you don't know, and that's okay,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But that was like God tier being at that thing. And for people who ask me about it, I always say the best thing I can describe it is it was not a con, it was a family reunion, but we all didn't know each other yet. You know,
Yeah.
I've met so many people at that thing who I'm now like real life friends with. And there were all these, and at times it was embarrassing afterwards because, like, Regina, like, I had been listening to the House
Sure.
of X podcast. And when I
Mhm.
first walked in and checked in, I had, you know, bought one of those like varsity coats, you know, and she's the one who handed it to me. And it wasn't until like 2 days later that I'm like, oh my God, that was Regina. I
Yeah.
went to the Hellfire Club shindig, right? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
there was a dance that happened, and afterwards I had a picture taken, and then 2 days later realized that was Alicia Wilder. Like these were the things that
That
happen at those
picture,
things.
that picture is one of my favorite ones
Me
too,
too.
because we, you know, took all those pictures after, and like that one so spicy.
Yes. Yeah,
So good.
I just wish my wife and I had gotten a picture like together because I got one individually and then she got one
Mhm.
individually with you guys. I'm so excited for sophomore year. I'm
Yeah.
interested to see like how it kicks up another notch. And yeah, I knew that it was really something special because it was about a month and a half later. I was back in Minneapolis for Twin Cities Con. And my
Mhm.
wife and I had booked a hotel room that was just down the block from the Minneapolis club.
Mm.
And one of the mornings of the con, we went and had breakfast in the restaurant that was right across the street from the Minneapolis club. So you could like look out the window and see like the whole. And I remember
Mm.
looking at it. I told Dylan later, I'm like, I have never in my life seen a building that I wanted to hug. Like I wanted to just go hug that building right then and there for the memories that I already had inside of it, and already looking forward to the memories that were going to come in the future.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's something very special, and I'm like so grateful to have been involved in it and to continue to be, you know, as a part of it. It's just to be present at it is something unlike anything else. And I think like every X-Men fan should go.
Yeah.
Everyone, buy
I'm
your tickets right now.
I'm excited to experience more of it too because I worked so much of it
Mm.
last year and just being different characters and being, you know, to actually be an attendee for a decent amount of time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, all right.
But
Well, that brings us in. That's our good landing spot right there. Justin, Alicia Wilder, can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast. For those of you listening, the Ex-Wife podcast, go check it out. Highly recommended. And of course, you can find either of them on Instagram and everywhere else. And so, yeah, once again, thank you so much. This was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, thank you so
Thanks for
much. It was
having
so
us.
fun.
It's been
All right. Adios, everybody.